Hello and welcome to Books Without Barcodes, where I review books published before 1978. Thus, they have no barcode on them because that is the year in which all publications were required to have a UPC code. And the book I am going to be reviewing today, as spoiler-free as possible, is Samuel R. Delany's Babel-17. I chose to read and review this book because of the fact that it's very small. It's a tiny book, but it's 160 pages of probably one of the best vintage sci-fi books I have read in a while. And that's specifically for a couple of reasons. So to give a little background about the author, Mr. Delany, this is written by a black man in 1966, during the crescendo of the civil rights movement. Mr. Delany was born in 1942 in Harlem. And what I found interesting about this book is when I first started it, this book opens with a poem by Marilyn Hacker. And I was like, okay, well, if this seems to be a recurring theme in the book, I need to look up who Marilyn Hacker is. And it turns out it is Samuel Delany's wife, which I found very interesting when I was doing research about the author, is that they had to, at that time, because when they got married in the very early 60s, there were only 2 states in the United States that allowed for interracial marriage. So they traveled from New York to Michigan to get married in the early 60s. And what I found even more interesting about that is that they had one child, and after the child became a legal adult, they got divorced. Now, I'm not going to suppose as to why they decided to go their separate ways. I do find it interesting that it was after, like the way the timing was, that it was after their adult child left the home, because that can be construed as the two of them, Marilyn Hacker and Mr. Delany, getting married as a marriage of convenience. Mr. Delany self-identifies as a gay man, and Marilyn Hacker, his ex-wife, identifies as a lesbian. So it can be construed as a marriage of convenience, and Mr. Delany is currently living with his partner now, which is pretty great. So when I realized that this was written by a black man who identifies in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, I was excited because most of the vintage sci-fi that I have read personally has been from cis white men. There's no problem with that. I want to just clarify that there's no problem. However, that does mean, as a Asian woman in 2021, some of the misogynistic themes are a little uncomfortable for me to read sometimes. Also, some of the language that gets used, which there is still some of that present in here, which I will get into in a minute, is uncomfortable. So I got excited thinking that this book would be a very different perspective and a very different style that was prevalent during that time. And I was rewarded greatly for that thought process. So this book opens up in the very first chapter. You're being introduced to 2 characters. That would be General Forrester, which is whose perspective you start the book off at, who is in his 50s, strong, muscular military man, and the current societal issues that are on the planet, where there's been an invader embargo on the planet, which has caused mass starvation and cannibalism, and it's just describing like this horrific life for the last couple decades that has now finally started to stabilize. And he's talking about having to meet this person at the bar, which is a departure for him because he's in civilian clothes and he's like always he's like the high up general man. And he goes to the bar to meet this person because they are trying to crack a code called Babel-17. And the person he's meeting, who's supposed to be a top-notch cryptographer, is Rydra Wong. And when I read both General Forrester's initial description and then read her description, it was definitely written for the male gaze, but nicely. Like, it's very nice. However, it was setting up, you know, kind of a typical mid-century theme of, you know, you have a beautiful, young, attractive woman in her 20s, and then you have a distinguished career man in his, like, middle age or above, right? That's a typical trope you see in a lot of mid-century cinema. And so I was like, oh crap, well, at least the main female character is an Asian woman, right? I was like, choice. And suddenly it switches from General Forrester's perspective immediately to Rydra Wong's, and it stays there for the duration of the book. So the main protagonist in this book, you find out, is a hyper-intelligent, beautiful, autistic Asian woman. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it because there's just so much for me personally to identify with the main character in the book, that I just, once that mind shift switched and General Forrester became like a side character, like just a name mentioned throughout most of the book, I was just overjoyed. Like, it starts off like a typical piece for this time period in a science fiction world, and then just goes somewhere else, and it's absolutely lovely. It reminds me a lot of the original series of Star Trek, where it's like, it's a little bit liberating, especially for the time period. And I loved this book so very much. So Rydra Wong ends up creating a crew, which the crew dynamic for flying the spacecraft in order to attain information, more information about Babel-17, is just awesome. Mr. Delany has built this just amazing world in here centered around this woman's deciphering of Babel-17. And the ship composition is just, I found so interesting. So in order for Rydra Wong, who happens to be a captain, so she's referred to throughout most of the books as Captain Wong, which awesome. Love a woman in charge, love a woman in power. Captain Wong has to select a crew, and so in order to find a pilot, she takes one of the customs officers to a bar to witness a wrestling match, because the way that ships are piloted, they're like hooked into some kind of system, and they have to wrestle with space in order to move through space and navigate like the different flows of the galaxies and star systems. And so captains go to these underground wrestling joints to see pilots wrestle, and based on how they wrestle and how they perform against each other as to who you're going to choose as your pilot, which I thought was just so cool. And then there are thruples, polyamorous relationships, and those are your navigators. And the thruples can be comprised of 3 women, 3 men, 2 men and a woman, 2 women and a man. Still in the gender binary, but it was just so cool to see that in 1966, to see something that's so contemporary in ideology to be represented in something from 1966. It was just so lovely. And then let's talk about the Discorporate, which they're dead people So they're souls that have left the body, and those are your eyes, ears, and nose for your ship. So because of the amount of like information they have to take in, if you've ever seen a picture from the Hubble telescope of like just absolutely stunning photographs of galaxies, Delany states that there is so much information and so much to see and so much to hear and so much to smell when you're in space that it would just debilitate and cause a live person to go insane. But because they're discorporate, which is the word that he uses, or no longer alive, these souls can take in that information and not go crazy and just kind of communicate via the spaceship information to the captain. However, because Captain Wong is so, because of her specialty, which I'm not going to ruin for y'all, because of her speciality and her gifts, she doesn't need the ship to communicate with the discorporate, which makes her like an actually just a phenomenal captain. And it's just so cool. And they have like the discorporate, because they're dead, they have like a graveyard section in the ship, and it's just a neat thought. And like in cities there are discorporate blocks of the city for dead souls to wander. It's just a really, really cool idea. And the Captain Wong goes on this just incredible space adventure and just goes on this incredible space adventure in order to figure out what Babel-17 is, learn how to use it, and then the ending of the story was just chef's kiss, so good. I highly recommend reading this book if you have not yet, and I am looking forward to finding more Samuel R. Delany works, because I enjoyed this so much. I also enjoyed this so much that I am going to put this one up for sale and buy one of the collector's editions hardcovers, so that way I can read it again, because this is definitely a book I want to reread, because I do feel like I'm going to discover more nuances in this book reading it over again. So I do highly recommend this. If you want to buy this specific copy and read it for yourself, I will put a link down below for that. But this is an amazing book by an amazing author, and the author has led quite a distinct life, as did the main character of this book, and I'm so happy to find someone that I can identify with in a vintage sci-fi novel. So thank you all so very much for watching. I know that this book is a little bit different because I know most of my audience are men, so hopefully this wasn't too alienating for y'all, and I'll see you all in next Monday for something else. It won't be a haul, y'all. I'm sorry. I know y'all have been enjoying my hauls, but I've got tons of books and not a lot more space, and I need to get to reading, and then I can do some more hauls. I mean, if I come across another amazing vintage section of books, I'm not going to turn that down, but like, I'm not going to go looking for it, if that makes sense. So I'll see you guys in the next video, and until then, bye! Bye.